The engines of Flight 409 were already humming, vibrating through the floorboards of the Boeing 777 when the shouting started. It wasn't a minor disagreement over armrests or overhead bin space. It was a vicious, calculated attack launched by a wealthy couple in first class against a quiet 17-year-old boy simply trying to read his book. They demanded he be thrown off, convinced his mere presence was an insult to their status and a threat to their safety. But what Ryder and Margaret Smith didn't know as they screamed for the captain was that their unhinged entitlement was about to crash spectacularly into reality. And the pilot, he wasn't about to kick the boy off. The departure lounge at JFK International Airport's Terminal 4 was a symphony of rolling luggage, overlapping announcements, and the low hum of nervous energy. For 17-year-old Terence Holloway, however, the noise faded into a pleasant, almost surreal background track. He sat near Gate B-22, clutching a crisp, navy blue boarding pass that felt heavier than the cardstock it was printed on. Above the barcode, in bold, unmistakable lettering, were the words, First Class. Seat 2A. Terence wasn't born into a world of priority boarding or lie-flat seats. He was born in the south side of Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. But Terence had a gift for code. By 15, he was writing algorithms that caught the attention of university professors. By 17, he had designed a predictive AI model for urban traffic flow that won the prestigious Global Innovators Youth Award. The prize? A full-ride scholarship to Cambridge University, complete with an all-expenses-paid relocation package sponsored by a major tech conglomerate. His mother had cried when she dropped him off at O'Hare for his connecting flight. "You belong in every room you walk into, Terry," she had told him, her hands resting firmly on his shoulders. "Don't let anyone make you feel small just because they've never seen someone like you standing so tall." As the gate agent announced the boarding for first-class passengers on the transatlantic flight to London Heathrow, Terence took a deep breath, hoisted his modest, well-worn canvas backpack over his shoulder, and joined the queue. He was dressed comfortably but neatly, a dark grey hoodie, clean dark jeans, and his favourite pair of Jordan 1s. Stepping onto the plane, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of soft, ambient lighting, polished wood accents, and plush leather. The air smelled faintly of lavender and expensive coffee. "Welcome aboard, sir," a flight attendant named Catherine greeted him with a warm, professional smile. "Seat 2A is just down the left aisle by the window." "Thank you," Terence replied softly, returning her smile. He found his pod, marveling at the sheer space. There was a large entertainment screen, a personal reading lamp, and a complimentary amenity kit that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget back home. He tucked his backpack under the ottoman, pulled out his worn copy of Dune, and settled in, snapping his noise-cancelling headphones over his ears. For the first time all day, he let himself relax. He had made it. 10 minutes later, the illusion of peace shattered. Ryder and Margaret Smith boarded the aircraft with the kind of imposing presence that demanded an audience. Ryder was a tall, silver-haired man in his late 60s, wearing a bespoke tailored suit that screamed Wall Street, his posture rigid with an air of unquestioned authority. Margaret followed closely behind, draped in a cashmere shawl and clutching a designer handbag that she held like a shield. She had sharp features, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and a gaze that swept over the cabin, assessing its worth. They were ticketed for seats 2C and 2D, directly across the aisle from Terence. As Margaret stepped into the aisle, her eyes landed on Terence. He was nodding along to a quiet beat in his headphones, completely engrossed in his book. Margaret stopped dead in her tracks, causing a minor pileup of passengers behind her. Her lips thinned into a hard, judgmental line. "Ryder," she hissed, tapping her husband's arm. Ryder followed her gaze, his brow furrowing instantly. He looked at Terence, a black teenager in a hoodie occupying a $5,000 seat, and immediately drew a conclusion steeped in decades of unchecked prejudice. "Excuse me," Ryder said loudly, snapping his fingers in the direction of the nearest flight attendant. "Excuse me, miss. There seems to be a significant error here." Catherine hurried over, her professional smile firmly in place. "How can I help you, Mr. Smith?" "You can help by directing this young man to his proper seat," Ryder said, not bothering to lower his voice. He gestured toward Terence, as if pointing out a stray dog that had wandered into a five-star restaurant. "I believe he's gotten lost on his way to economy." The sheer volume of Ryder's voice pierced through Terence's noise-cancelling headphones. He looked up, confused, pulling one of the ear cups back. He found Ryder Smith standing in the aisle, pointing directly at him, while Margaret stood beside him, clutching her purse with white-knuckled intensity. "Is there a problem?" Terence asked, his voice steady but laced with genuine bewilderment. "Yes, there is a problem," Margaret snapped, stepping forward. "You are in the wrong cabin. This area is reserved for first-class passengers. The back of the plane is that way." Terence blinked, his heart giving a sudden, uncomfortable jolt. His mother's words echoed in his head. "You belong in every room you walk into." He forced himself to stay calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. "I'm in seat 2A, Terence said politely, holding the ticket up so they could see the bold print. "This is my assigned seat," Ryder scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. He didn't even look at the ticket. "I don't know how you managed to print that, or whose frequent flyer account you hacked into, but you do not belong here." "Flight attendants, I want this handled immediately. My wife and I paid a premium for exclusivity and peace of mind, not to be seated next to—" He waved a hand vaguely at Terence's hoodie, leaving the rest of the ugly sentence hanging in the air. Catherine, the flight attendant, stepped between them, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rising alarm. "Mr. Smith, please keep your voice down. I can assure you that all passengers seated in this cabin are properly ticketed." "I demand you scan his ticket again," Margaret shrilled, her voice climbing an octave. Several other passengers in the cabin began to peer over the tops of their pods, their expressions ranging from curious to deeply uncomfortable. "He's clearly up to something. Look at him. He doesn't even have proper luggage, just that dirty backpack." Terence felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up his neck, but beneath it, a slow, cold anger began to form. "My bag is fine," Terence said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming firmer, "and my ticket is valid. I'd appreciate it if you left me alone." "Don't you take that tone with my wife," Ryder bellowed, taking a menacing step toward Terence's pod. "Mr. Smith, step back, please," Catherine instructed, her voice losing its customer service warmth and taking on a sharp edge of authority. She turned to Terence. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass just to clear this up?" Terence handed it over without a word. Catherine pulled out her digital scanner and scanned the barcode. It chimed a pleasant, confirming beep. The screen flashed green. "Holloway, Terence, 2A, confirmed." "His ticket is perfectly valid, Mr. and Mrs. Smith," Catherine said, turning back to the couple. "Mr. Holloway is a first-class passenger. Now, I must ask you to please take your seats. We are preparing for pushback." Margaret looked as though she had been slapped. "Valid? That's impossible. Who paid for it? I want to know who paid for it." "Ma'am, passenger information is strictly confidential," Catherine replied firmly. "Please sit down." "This is unacceptable," Ryder growled. He leaned in close to Catherine, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "I am a Platinum Medallion member. I fly this route twice a month. I know the purser and I know the management. I am telling you that this boy is a security risk. He's acting erratic, he's disrespectful, and he is making my wife feel incredibly unsafe. If you don't remove him, I will have your job." Terence sat paralyzed. He wasn't acting erratic. He hadn't raised his voice. He had literally been reading a science fiction novel. The sheer audacity of the lie, the weaponization of the word unsafe, made his stomach churn. He knew exactly what Ryder was doing. He was creating a narrative. If a wealthy, older white couple claimed a black teenager was threatening them, history dictated that the authorities would ask questions later, usually after the teenager was already in handcuffs. "I haven't done anything," Terence said, looking around the cabin. A few passengers quickly looked down at their phones, avoiding his gaze. A man in seat 1B subtly shook his head in disgust at the Smiths, but said nothing. "You are threatening us with your presence," Margaret cried out, engaging in a stunning display of performative victimhood. She grabbed her chest. "Ryder, my palpitations. I can't fly like this. He needs to be taken off the plane right now." The cabin doors had been closed. The seatbelt sign chimed, a sharp ding that echoed through the tense silence of first class. Outside, the heavy tug of the tow tractor vibrated through the floor as the massive Boeing 777 slowly began its pushback from the gate. "Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, we are moving," Catherine said, her voice tight with panic. "It is a severe FAA violation for passengers to be standing during pushback. You must take your seats immediately." "Not until he is gone!" Ryder roared. Abandoning any pretense of civility, he lunged past Catherine, reaching into Terence's pod. He grabbed the strap of Terence's canvas backpack from under the ottoman and yanked it out into the aisle. "If you won't remove his trash, I will." "Hey, don't touch my stuff," Terence shouted, instantly unbuckling his seatbelt and springing to his feet. In the backpack was his laptop, containing years of coding work, his Cambridge admission papers, and the only photo he had of his late grandfather. He grabbed the other end of the bag, planting his feet. The physical struggle lasted only 2 seconds, but in the confined space of the aircraft, it felt like an explosion. "He's attacking me! Help! He's attacking my husband!" Margaret began to scream at the top of her lungs. "Let go of the bag!" Terence yelled, pulling hard. Ryder, surprised by the boy's strength, stumbled forward, releasing the strap and crashing awkwardly into the side of seat 2C. "Security!" Ryder bellowed, his face purple with rage as he scrambled to right himself. "I want him arrested. This is an assault. You all saw it. He assaulted me." Catherine grabbed the nearest intercom phone, her hands shaking. "Flight deck, this is Catherine in first. We have a code yellow escalating to red. Passenger physical altercation in the forward cabin. We need assistance immediately." At that exact moment, the heavy vibration of the pushback tractor abruptly ceased. The plane shuddered as the pilot hit the heavy aircraft brakes. The massive GE-90 engines, which had just begun to spool up with a deafening roar, suddenly whined down, winding back into a low, idle hum. The sudden stop threw Margaret off balance, sending her collapsing into her seat with a dramatic shriek. The PA system clicked open. A deep, calm, and unmistakably authoritative voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller from the flight deck. We are pausing our pushback and holding our position on the tarmac. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin. I am coming out." A collective murmur swept through the plane. It was incredibly rare for a pilot to halt a taxiing aircraft and leave the cockpit. The severity of the situation had just skyrocketed. Ryder straightened his suit jacket, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He looked down at Terence, who was breathing heavily, clutching his backpack to his chest. "You're done, kid," Ryder sneered quietly, ensuring only Terence could hear. "You think you can play with the big boys? I'm going to ruin whatever little life you have. You'll be leaving this airport in a police cruiser." Terence swallowed hard. The initial adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a cold, terrifying dread. He was a minor, alone, hundreds of miles from his mother, facing down a wealthy man who was already spinning a web of lies. Even with his scholarship and his genius-level intellect, Terence knew how this script usually played out. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, praying for a miracle. The reinforced cockpit door clicked and swung open. Captain Harrison Miller stepped into the forward galley. He was a man in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a face carved by 30 years of aviation experience. 4 gold stripes gleamed on the epaulets of his pristine white shirt. His eyes were cold, sweeping the first-class cabin like a hawk looking for prey. He walked past the galley and stopped at row 2. "Captain, thank God!" Ryder immediately stepped forward, extending a hand as if greeting an old friend at a country club. "Ryder Smith, we have a massive security issue here. This young man," he pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Terence, "is belligerent, violent, and completely unhinged. He assaulted me and threatened my wife. I demand he be escorted off this aircraft by federal marshals." Captain Miller did not take Ryder's hand. He looked at the older man, then at Margaret, who was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, and finally, he turned his gaze to Terence. Terence stood frozen, holding his backpack, bracing himself for the order to pack his things. Captain Miller looked at Terence's face, then down at the backpack. A strange, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the captain's expression. The rigid professionalism softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of intense recognition. "What is your name, son?" Captain Miller asked Terence, his voice steady. "Terence Holloway, sir," he replied, his voice cracking slightly. Captain Miller turned slowly back to Ryder Smith. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Smith," Captain Miller said, his voice deadly quiet, echoing slightly in the hushed cabin. "Are you aware of exactly who you just tried to physically remove from my aircraft?" The silence in the first-class cabin was absolute. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Ryder Smith's smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. He blinked at Captain Harrison Miller, then glanced back at Terence, who was still clutching his canvas backpack like a shield. "Who?" Ryder scoffed, his voice lacking the booming confidence it had possessed moments ago. "He's a nobody, a street kid who somehow scammed his way into a premium seat. I told you he assaulted—" "Quiet!" Captain Miller snapped. The single word cracked like a whip through the cabin. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute, unwavering authority behind it caused Ryder's jaw to snap shut. Captain Miller turned to the flight attendant. "Catherine, hand me the Alpha Manifest, the one printed directly from the corporate office." Catherine, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, quickly retrieved a red-bordered tablet from the galley bulkhead and handed it to the pilot. Captain Miller tapped the screen once, twice, and then turned it so Ryder and Margaret Smith could see it. "Mr. Smith," Captain Miller began, his tone ice-cold. "This airline, Trans-Global Airways, is a subsidiary of the Horizon Corporate Group. Are you familiar with them?" "Of course I am," Ryder muttered, crossing his arms defensively. "I handle tech portfolios. Horizon is a Fortune 500 conglomerate. What does that have to do with this situation?" "It has everything to do with it," Captain Miller replied. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at the screen. "You see this red flag next to seat 2A? That is an Alpha-tier VIP designation. It is a classification higher than your Platinum Medallion status. It means the passenger in this seat is flying under the direct, personal protection and sponsorship of the Horizon Corporate Group's board of directors. Margaret let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. That's absurd. Look at him. He's wearing a hoodie. He doesn't even have a matching luggage set. What he has, Mrs. Smith, is an intellect that outpaces nearly everyone in this room, Captain Miller said, finally turning a warm, respectful gaze toward Terence. This young man is Terence Halloway. 2 days ago, he won the Global Innovators Youth Award for designing an artificial intelligence model that optimizes emergency vehicle routing in gridlocked urban centers. Terence stared at the captain, his eyes wide. He knew Horizon had sponsored his scholarship to Cambridge, but he had no idea his name was flagged in the airline system, let alone that the pilot would know his face. Captain Miller took a step closer to Terence, his voice softening. My sister is an EMT in downtown Chicago, Terence. Last month, her rig was trapped in a dead-stop traffic jam on the I-90, with a critical pediatric patient in the back. The dispatcher used the beta version of your software to instantly reroute them through an active industrial park, bypassing a 3-mile pileup. That little girl lived because your algorithm shaved 14 minutes off their transport time. A quiet gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. The passenger in seat 1B, a sharp-eyed man in a tailored navy suit who had been quietly observing the entire ordeal, suddenly set his tablet down, his attention entirely locked on the unfolding drama. So, when I see a note on my manifest that Terence Halloway is flying on my aircraft, sponsored by the CEO of our parent company, to begin a full-ride scholarship at Cambridge, Captain Miller continued, turning his glare back to Ryder, I make it a point to know exactly who he is. I saw him board. I noted his seat. And I certainly noted when you, Mr. Smith, decided to lay your hands on him and his property. Ryder's face drained of color, shifting from an angry purple to a sickly, pale grey. He looked at Terence, then at the heavy canvas backpack he had tried to rip away. It wasn't full of stolen goods. It held the mind and work of a prodigy. I didn't know, Ryder stammered, taking a small step back. The arrogant Wall Street titan was crumbling, replaced by a man suddenly realizing he had stepped onto a landmine of his own making. He looked out of place. It was a reasonable assumption, and he was aggressive. He was reading a book, Catherine interjected, finding her courage. She stepped up beside the captain. Mr. Halloway was completely silent until you began screaming at him, Mr. Smith. You initiated the physical contact. I witnessed the entire thing, and so did the rest of the cabin. She's right, a voice called out. It was the man in seat 1B. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. I saw the whole thing. The kid was minding his own business. Smith here practically attacked him. Margaret clutched her husband's arm, her eyes darting around the cabin as the reality of the situation closed in on them. Ryder, do something. Tell them who you are. They know exactly who he is, Mrs. Smith, Captain Miller said, his voice dropping into a register that promised severe consequences. He is a passenger who has just committed a federal offense on my aircraft. Federal offense? Ryder choked out, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. Now, see here, Captain, let's not blow this out of proportion. It was a misunderstanding, a simple lapse in judgment. I apologize. We'll sit down and you can get this plane in the air. I have a very important merger meeting in London tomorrow morning. There is no we sitting down, Mr. Smith, Captain Miller said, pulling a heavy black radio from his belt. Under Title 49 of the United States Code, interfering with the duties of a flight crew and physically assaulting a passenger are federal crimes. You disrupted the safety of this cabin, caused a panic, and forced me to halt a pushback procedure. You can't do this, Margaret shrieked, all pretense of her previous palpitations vanishing as sheer panic took over. "We are Platinum Medallion members. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with this airline." "Your status was officially revoked the second you laid hands on another passenger," Captain Miller replied coldly. He keyed the radio. "Ground control, this is Flight 409. We have a Level 3 security incident in the forward cabin. I need Port Authority police at Gate B22 immediately for passenger offloading. 2 individuals." "Copy that. 409. The radio crackled back. "Units are already rolling." Ryder's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he leaned heavily against the edge of his pod. "Captain, please. You don't understand. If I miss this flight, the London deal falls through. My firm will crucify me. I'll double whatever they paid for his ticket. I'll write the kid a check right now. $10,000. Terence, who had remained quiet throughout the captain's defense, finally spoke up. His voice was no longer shaking. It was resolute, grounded in the validation of his worth. "I don't want your money, Mr. Smith," Terence said, looking the older man dead in the eye. "I just wanted to read my book." The absolute simplicity of Terence's statement hit Ryder harder than the threat of the police. It laid bare the grotesque absurdity of his prejudice. "Ryder!" The man from seat 1B suddenly spoke up again, his voice cutting through the tension. He stepped out into the aisle, fully revealing himself. Ryder whipped his head around, his eyes widening in pure horror as he finally recognized the man. Mr. Arrington?" David Arrington, the founding partner of Arrington Capital, the very firm where Ryder Smith was a vice president, buttoned his suit jacket with meticulous, terrifying precision. "I thought that was you causing a scene, Ryder. But I couldn't quite believe my ears," David said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I decided to sit back and observe. I wanted to see if the man managing $1 billion of our clients' money possessed even an ounce of judgment or emotional regulation." "David, please let me explain," Ryder pleaded, his hands shaking openly now. "The stress of the merger. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking perfectly clearly, Ryder. You were thinking exactly what you always think, that the world belongs to you, and anyone who doesn't look like you is beneath you," David Arrington said, his voice ruthless. "You just tried to physically throw a heavily sponsored tech prodigy off an airplane because you didn't like his hoodie. A prodigy, I might add, whose software our firm is currently trying to invest in." Ryder gasped, the air completely knocked out of his lungs. "That London merger?" David continued, stepping closer to Ryder. "Consider yourself off the deal. In fact, consider yourself off the payroll. When you get back to your office, assuming you aren't in federal lockup, your keycard won't work. Human resources will courier your belongings to your home. We are done." Margaret burst into hysterical tears, sinking into seat 2D and burying her face in her hands. Ryder stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly like a fish pulled onto dry land. In the span of 15 minutes, his entitlement had cost him his flight, his elite status, his reputation, and his highly lucrative career. The heavy thud of boots sounded in the jet bridge, and moments later, the aircraft door was opened from the outside. 3 heavily armed Port Authority police officers, led by a stern-faced sergeant named Callahan, stepped onto the plane. "Captain?" Sergeant Callahan asked, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "These 2, Sergeant," Captain Miller said, pointing directly at the Smiths. "Assault, battery, and interference with flight crew operations. We have multiple witnesses, including myself and Mr. Arrington here." "All right, folks, let's go," Sergeant Callahan said, stepping toward Ryder. "Grab your carry-ons. You're coming with us." "I'm a respected businessman," Ryder tried one last, desperate flex of his vanishing power. "You can't treat me like a common criminal." "You're not a businessman right now, sir. You're a suspect," Officer Callahan replied, utterly unimpressed. He reached out, firmly gripping Ryder's arm and turning him toward the door. "Walk." The first-class cabin watched in complete silence as Ryder and Margaret Smith, the couple who had demanded to be shielded from the undesirables, were perp-walked off the aircraft in disgrace. Margaret sobbed loudly the entire way, while Ryder stared blankly ahead, a broken, ruined man. Once the door was sealed shut again, a collective exhale swept through the cabin. A few passengers began to clap quietly, the applause rippling through the pods. Captain Miller turned back to Terence. The harsh, authoritative mask vanished, replaced by a warm, paternal smile. "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Halloway," Captain Miller said, extending his hand. Terence reached out and shook it firmly. "Thank you, Captain. For everything." "Don't thank me. You earned your seat. Never let anyone tell you otherwise," Miller said. He gestured to the empty pods across the aisle. "Catherine, please see to it that Mr. Halloway has whatever he needs for the duration of this flight. The caviar, the prime rib, whatever he wants." "Absolutely, Captain," Catherine beamed, looking at Terence with newfound respect. As Captain Miller headed back to the flight deck, David Arrington stopped by Terence's pod. He pulled a sleek, embossed business card from his pocket and handed it to the teenager. "When you finish at Cambridge, Terence, or if you ever want to launch a startup of your own, call me," David said with a genuine smile. "I prefer to invest in people who know how to stand their ground." Terence took the card, looking at the gold foil lettering. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Arrington." 10 minutes later, Flight 409 finally pushed back from the gate. As the massive engines roared to life and the plane rocketed down the runway, ascending into the twilight sky over New York, Terence settled back into his plush leather seat. He opened his copy of Dune, adjusted his noise-cancelling headphones, and finally found the peace he had been looking for. He wasn't just flying first class. He had arrived. The flight across the Atlantic was the most peaceful 7 hours of Terence Halloway's life. After dining on a perfectly seared filet mignon, a stark contrast to the microwaved ramen he usually ate late at night while coding, he reclined his seat into a fully flat bed. Wrapped in a plush duvet, the hum of the Boeing 777's engines lulled him into a deep, dreamless sleep. He awoke to the gentle morning light filtering through the window shades, and the soft voice of Catherine, the flight attendant, offering him a warm towel and fresh espresso. As the aircraft began its descent into London Heathrow, breaking through the thick grey British cloud cover, Terence looked out at the sprawling patchwork of green fields and dense urban sprawl. He felt a profound sense of arrival. 3,000 miles away, in a sterile, windowless interrogation room at JFK's Terminal 4, Ryder and Margaret Smith were experiencing a very different kind of morning. The adrenaline had long since evaporated, leaving behind a cold, nauseating reality. Ryder sat on a hard metal chair, his bespoke suit wrinkled and smelling of stale sweat. Margaret was slumped in the corner, her makeup smeared, crying silently into a crumpled tissue. They had been stripped of their shoelaces, belts, and cell phones. The heavy metal door clicked open, and Special Agent John Kessler of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force walked in, followed closely by Sergeant Callahan of the Port Authority. Kessler tossed a thick manila folder onto the metal table with a resounding smack. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Smith," Agent Kessler said, pulling out a chair. He did not offer a smile. "I'm sure you're wondering why you haven't been granted bail yet." "I demand my phone," Ryder croaked, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting at indifferent police officers. "I need to call my attorney, William Standish. This entire thing is a colossal overreaction. It was a verbal disagreement." It ceased to be a verbal disagreement the moment you physically assaulted another passenger and forced a commercial aircraft to abort its taxi sequence, Kessler replied evenly. He opened the folder. "And it seems the public disagrees with your assessment of the situation as well." Agent Kessler reached into his pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and slid it across the table. On the screen was a video playing on a major news network's website. Ryder's stomach plummeted. It was a recording taken from seat 3F by a passenger named Soraya Jenkins. The angle clearly showed Ryder lunging at Terence, yanking the teenager's backpack and screaming aggressively while Terence remained seated and defensive. The audio was crystal clear. Margaret's performative shrieking echoed thinly from the phone's speaker. "The video was uploaded to Twitter by a fellow passenger about 10 minutes after you were escorted off the plane," Kessler explained, his tone devoid of sympathy. "It currently has 14 million views. The hashtag JFK First Class Assault is trending globally." Margaret gasped, burying her face in her hands. "Oh God, the country club? Our friends?" "Your friends are the least of your worries, ma'am," Sergeant Callahan chimed in, leaning against the doorframe. "As of 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Federal Aviation Administration has formally levied a civil penalty against both of you. For interfering with flight crew duties and physical assault, you are each being fined $85,000. $85,000, Ryder choked, gripping the edge of the table. "Additionally," Kessler continued, ignoring the outburst, "under the FAA Reauthorization Act, you have both been permanently placed on the federal no-fly list. You will never board a commercial aircraft in the United States again." "Period." Ryder stared at the federal agent, the magnitude of his ruin finally penetrating his thick shell of arrogance. But the hammer had not finished falling. "One more thing, Mr. Smith," Kessler said, pulling a printed sheet of paper from the back of the folder. "Since you requested to make a phone call, you should probably know who not to call. This press release went out an hour ago from Arrington Capital." Kessler read directly from the page. "Arrington Capital firmly condemns the abhorrent, discriminatory, and violent actions of Ryder Smith, which were captured on video last night at JFK International Airport. Effective immediately, Mr. Smith's employment has been terminated. We do not tolerate prejudice or physical aggression in any form, and his behavior is entirely antithetical to our corporate values." Ryder sat paralyzed. He had spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder, crushing anyone in his way, amassing wealth and a fragile sense of superiority. In less than 24 hours, his temper and his deeply ingrained prejudice had burned it all to ash. He was jobless, internationally disgraced, facing massive federal fines and staring down criminal assault charges. "You can make your phone call now, Ryder," Kessler said, standing up, "though I doubt Mr. Standish is going to want to take this case pro bono." The cobblestone streets of Cambridge were slick with a persistent, misty rain, reflecting the amber glow of the ancient street lamps. For Terence Halloway, the damp chill was a welcome shock to the system. It had been 4 months since Flight 409. 4 months since he had stepped off that Boeing 777, leaving behind the terrifying echo of Ryder Smith's unhinged entitlement. The transition from the south side of Chicago to the hallowed, centuries-old halls of Cambridge University had not been seamless. In his first few weeks, Terence wrestled with a suffocating imposter syndrome, exacerbated by the viral nature of the incident at JFK. Millions of people had watched the video. He had received thousands of messages, some overflowing with support, others dripping with the same venomous prejudice the Smiths had exhibited. But Terence possessed a mind that thrived on finding order in chaos. He channeled his lingering anxiety into his work. Under the meticulous mentorship of Dr. Arthur Pendleton, the head of the computer science department, Terence was given unparalleled access to the university's quantum computing arrays. His project, officially dubbed Aegis Routing Systems, was evolving from a theoretical traffic prediction model into a live, breathing artificial intelligence capable of managing the emergency logistical grids of entire metropolitan areas. Dr. Pendleton, a stern but deeply empathetic man who had seen generations of brilliant minds pass through his labs, recognized the heavy burden Terence carried. "The world is incredibly loud right now, Terence," Pendleton had told him, late one evening, sliding a cup of black tea across the desk. "They want a victim, or they want a hero. You are neither. You are a scientist. Let the noise outside these walls deafen itself. You speak through your code." And speak he did. By the end of his first term, Terence's beta tests for Aegis were yielding results that defied conventional traffic management algorithms. He had successfully modeled a simulation of the Greater London area, proving his software could autonomously clear pathways for emergency vehicles, potentially reducing casualty rates by an astonishing 19%. 3,500 miles away, the noise Dr. Pendleton had spoken of was entirely consuming Ryder and Margaret Smith. The consequences of their actions on Flight 409 had not ended with a perp walk off the aircraft. That was merely the opening act of their complete and utter destruction. Their high-priced defense attorney, William Standish, a man who charged $2,000 an hour to make rich people's problems disappear, sat across from them in his sleek Manhattan office. It was a bleak Tuesday morning in late November. "I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you both," Standish said, clasping his hands on his mahogany desk. "The public relations aspect of this case is radioactive. I cannot find a judge in the Southern District of New York who doesn't secretly want to make an example out of you." "We are victims of cancel culture," Ryder exploded, his face flushed. The impeccably tailored suits he used to wear were now hanging loosely on his frame. He had lost 15 pounds in 3 months, his face lined with deep ravines of stress. "It was a misunderstanding. The boy was aggressive. You need to subpoena the flight attendants. They're lying." Standish sighed, a sound completely devoid of sympathy. "Ryder, there are 14 witnesses willing to testify under oath that you initiated the physical altercation. We have the FAA's civil penalty, which, by the way, the agency is demanding you pay by the end of the month. That is $85,000 each, $170,000 total. And that is completely separate from the criminal charges." Margaret, who had been sitting in terrified silence, finally spoke. "William, what about the criminal trial? You said you could get the assault charges reduced to a misdemeanor." "I said I would try," Standish corrected sharply. "But the U.S. Attorney's Office is pursuing hate crime enhancements under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd, Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. They are arguing that your unprovoked physical assault on Mr. Halloway, a black teenager, coupled with your documented remarks about him not belonging in first class, constitutes a bias-motivated crime." Ryder slumped back in his leather chair as if he had been physically struck. "Hate crime enhancements? That's federal prison." "Up to 10 years, yes," Standish confirmed coldly. "Furthermore, my retainer needs to be replenished. The preliminary hearings, the depositions, and the media injunctions have drained the initial $250,000 you deposited. I need another $300,000 by Friday if I am to continue representing you." $300,000? Ryder choked. "I don't have it. Arrington Capital froze all my accounts when they fired me. They cited a morals clause in my contract and seized my unvested equity and my annual bonus. They stripped me of everything." Margaret turned to her husband, her eyes wide, with a mixture of horror and profound disgust. The social isolation had already broken her. They had been expelled from the Greenwich Country Club. Their friends had stopped returning their calls. The charity boards Margaret sat on had asked for her immediate resignation. "You don't have the money," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. "It's tied up, Maggie. The lawyers for Arrington are fighting my severance package." Margaret stood up, grabbing her designer coat. "I can't do this anymore, Ryder. I'm moving into my sister's house in Connecticut. The lawyers can contact me there. I am filing for divorce." "Maggie, wait," Ryder called out, but the heavy oak door of the law firm clicked shut behind her. He was entirely alone. As winter thawed into a crisp English spring, Terence's life took another unexpected turn. He received an email directly from the executive assistant to David Arrington. The CEO of Arrington Capital, the man who had defended Terence on the plane and fired Ryder Smith on the spot, was in London for a European summit. He requested a meeting. Terence took the train from Cambridge to London, arriving at the towering glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district of Canary Wharf. He was ushered into an expansive boardroom that overlooked the winding River Thames. David Arrington entered the room with the same sharp, commanding presence he had possessed on the Boeing 777. He warmly shook Terence's hand, gesturing for him to sit. Joining them was Arrington Capital's chief technology officer, a brilliant woman named Dr. Evelyn Vance, who had spent the last week tearing through Terence's patent filings and the encrypted beta code of the Aegis project. "It's good to see you again, Terence," David said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I trust Cambridge is treating you well?" "It is, Mr. Arrington. The resources are incredible. Thank you for setting this up." "You earned it," David replied seamlessly. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Terence, we didn't bring you here to catch up. Evelyn and her team have been running stress tests on the algorithms you've built over the last 6 months." "Evelyn?" Dr. Vance looked at Terence, her expression one of profound professional respect. "Mr. Halloway, your approach to predictive load balancing on municipal grids is astonishing. You aren't just reacting to traffic. Your AI is forecasting choke points based on historical data, weather patterns, and real-time cellular density. Our firm has been looking to invest heavily in smart city infrastructure. Your Aegis system is the missing link." Terence felt a swell of pride, his heart beating a rapid rhythm against his ribs. "It's fully scalable," Terence explained, his confidence taking over. "Right now it's designed for emergency vehicles, but with the right server capacity, it could manage commercial freight routes, public transit, even airborne drone corridors." David smiled. "We know. And we want to own the exclusive commercial licensing rights. Arrington Capital is prepared to launch a new tech subsidiary entirely built around the Aegis architecture." David slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table. Terence opened it. The numbers on the first page made his breath hitch. "We are offering a $3 million upfront acquisition fee for the commercial licensing," David said, his voice steady and serious. "Furthermore, you will retain ownership of the core patent, and you will receive a 7% royalty on gross revenue from every municipal contract this new subsidiary secures. You will be placed on the board as Chief Architectural Advisor, though we expect you to finish your degree at Cambridge before taking on any daily operational roles." Terence stared at the contract. $3 million. It was an amount of money that didn't even compute in the reality he had grown up in. It meant his mother would never have to work another shift at the diner. It meant he could buy her a house. It meant generational security. I don't know what to say, Terence whispered, tracing the bold print of the contract with his finger. There's one more thing you should know before you sign, David Arrington said, a sharp, almost dangerous glint appearing in his eye. I am a firm believer in the balance of the universe, Terence. In my firm, when an executive is terminated for cause, especially for egregious public misconduct that damages the firm's reputation, their unvested equity, stock options, and annual bonuses are immediately seized and returned to the corporate treasury. Terence looked up, his brow furrowing, as he began to piece together what David was saying. When I fired Ryder Smith, David continued, his tone dropping into a satisfying register of absolute justice. He was due a massive year-end bonus and a payout of his senior partner equity. We seized every single penny of it. We diverted those specific funds into an aggressive tech acquisition pool. David tapped the leather folder, sitting in front of Terence. The $3 million we are offering you today, Terence, David smiled, a genuine, fiercely loyal smile, is being drawn exclusively, dollar for dollar, from Ryder Smith's forfeited accounts. The wealth he thought made him superior to you is literally funding your empire. The sheer, poetic gravity of the moment washed over Terence. He thought back to the airplane. He remembered the humiliation of being screamed at, of having his belongings grabbed, of being told he didn't belong in a space he had rightfully earned. And now, the very man who had tried to destroy his future was unwittingly financing it. Terence picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen resting beside the folder. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name on the dotted line. As soon as he left the building, standing on the bustling streets of Canary Wharf, Terence pulled out his phone and dialed the number he knew by heart. "Hello?" his mother answered, her voice tired but warm. "Hey, Mom," Terence said, tears finally brimming in his eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming victory. "I need you to go ahead and put your 2 weeks' notice in at the diner. We're done." 3 weeks later, the sweltering heat of summer had settled over New York City. Ryder Smith sat in a cramped, poorly ventilated one-bedroom apartment in a rundown section of Queens. The walls were thin, and the relentless noise of the elevated train rattled his cheap windows every 10 minutes. He was wearing a stained undershirt, nursing a cheap beer. He was out on bail, awaiting his federal trial, but his life was already effectively over. His bank accounts had been decimated by legal fees and his wife's aggressive divorce settlement. He was blacklisted from every financial institution on Wall Street. Even the local grocery store clerk seemed to recognize him from the viral video, shooting him looks of undisguised contempt. The small, static-filled television in the corner of his living room was tuned to a financial news network. Ryder watched it out of habit, a masochistic reminder of the world he had once ruled. The anchor's voice cut through the hum of the cheap window AC unit. In major market news today, Arrington Capital has officially launched its highly anticipated smart city infrastructure subsidiary, Aegis Tech. The launch comes on the heels of a massive, multi-million-dollar acquisition of an AI routing system designed by Cambridge prodigy Terence Halloway. Ryder froze, his grip tightening on the aluminum can. The screen flashed to a high-definition photograph of Terence. He was standing outside the Arrington Capital building in London, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, looking confident, brilliant, and completely unstoppable. Sources inside Arrington Capital confirm, the anchor continued cheerfully, that the seed money for this massive acquisition was generated entirely from internal corporate restructuring, specifically utilizing the seized assets and bonuses of former executives terminated for cause. A brilliant pivot by CEO David Arrington, turning corporate liability into a massive technological asset. The beer can crumpled in Ryder's hand, spilling warm liquid over his knuckles, but he didn't feel it. The reality crashed down on him with the weight of an anvil. It wasn't just that he had lost everything. It wasn't just that the teenager he had assaulted was now a millionaire. It was the horrifying, inescapable truth that his money, the millions he had hoarded, the wealth he had used as a shield to justify his arrogance and cruelty, had been taken from him and handed directly to the very boy he had tried to throw off an airplane. Ryder stared at the television screen as Terrence's smiling face faded out, replaced by a commercial. The apartment suddenly felt incredibly small, the walls closing in. He had demanded the boy be removed from his presence, convinced they didn't belong in the same class. The universe had agreed. It had simply removed Ryder from the equation entirely. The saga of Terrence Holloway and Ryder Smith is a profound testament to the ultimate, uncompromising nature of consequence. In a society quick to judge based on superficial markers of status, the story highlights how fragile privilege truly is when built on a foundation of prejudice and arrogance. Ryder Smith believed his wealth exempted him from basic human decency, weaponizing his position to tear down a young, brilliant mind. Instead, he triggered his own spectacular downfall, facing federal charges, financial ruin, and total societal exile. Meanwhile, Terrence Holloway, armed with quiet dignity and unparalleled intellect, rose above the noise of hatred, the brutal, poetic justice of the outcome, where the aggressor's forfeited wealth directly financed the victim's multi-million-dollar empire, serves as a powerful reminder. True class is not printed on a boarding pass or dictated by a bank account. It is defined by character, resilience, and merit. Those who attempt to clip the wings of the brilliant will inevitably find themselves grounded, forced to watch from the dirt as the people they underestimated soar higher than they ever could.